Today we're going to learn how to solve a system of linear equations through the form of substitution. So this involves a few steps. We're not going to use graphs. We are going to solve just mathematically. So make sure you write the steps along with me. So the first step that you do is solve one equation for a variable, either x or y, which usually you'll do y and you'll see it'll be in slope-intercept form or something, but that's what you do first. The second is substitute the expression in for that variable. And I'll show you this, of course, in our examples. And then solve for the given variable. Then the last thing you're going to do is substitute your answer into one of the equations. Now, I do not expect you guys to understand what exactly is going on yet because I haven't done any examples, but once we do a few examples, it's nice to have these steps in front of you so you can come back to them later. So, step one, we're going to do our first example. It says to solve one equation for a variable, either x or y. So, we're going to look at our first example. We have a system here. Well, we already have a variable by himself already. So step one's kind of done for us. So we basically have to get something in slope-intercept form for the most part, okay? Then it says to substitute the expression in for that variable. So what that means is if I have x is equal to 2x minus 4, or I'm sorry, y is equal to 2x minus 4, I get to plug that in for y down on the second equation. Y is equal to 2x minus 4. It's the same thing if you have y is equal to 2, y is equal to x, y is equal to negative 7. You get to plug that in or substitute it in. So but the way to do that is we rewrite the second equation of 7x minus 2, but instead of 2 times y, you multiply it by that whole expression of 2x minus 4 equals 5. So I plugged in 2x minus 4 in for that second equation. So that's step 2, you're substituting it in. Now, step 3 says to solve for the given variable. In this equation, we only have x's now. So now we're just going to solve the equation like we have learned in the past. So the first thing we do is we're going to distribute this negative 2 times 2x, and negative 2 times negative 4. So I have the 7x, and then I have negative 2 times 2x is negative 4x. Negative 2 times negative 4 is a positive 8, equals 5. I combine my like terms on the same side of the equation, so 7x minus 4x is 3x. Then I bring everything else down. Now I get x alone. I'm solving for that given variable. So the first thing I do is I'm going to subtract 8 to the other side. So I'm left with 3x equals a negative 3. And then I just divide by 3 to get my answer for x. So x is equal to negative 1. So I have solved for the given variable. Now, my answer is a coordinate. I need to have a y also. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to plug in x equals negative 1. I'm going to substitute it in to one of the equations on the top. Okay, I'm actually going to plug into the first equation. So I'm going to rewrite the first equation so you guys can see it a little clearer. Y equals 2x minus 4. And I'm going to substitute in my answer from x. I have that it's equal to negative 1. So instead of 2 times x, I have 2 times negative 1 minus 4. I just plugged in x into the equation. So let's solve. 2 times negative 1 is a negative 2, so y equals negative 2 minus 4. So we have negative 2 minus 4, or negative 2 with a negative 4, and the answer is negative 6. Once I have my x and my y together, I get to write my answer. As we learn through graphing systems, our answer has to be a coordinate, and our coordinate is always x comma y. So we found our x and our y. My final answer is -1, -6. So that is my final answer, and it must be written that way. I'm going to do the next example with you guys as well. So the first step is to solve one equation for a variable. Well, both of these equations have y by himself, okay? So that's pretty cool. So it's already done for us. We don't have to change anything. Then it says substitute the expression for that variable. So just as I said before, hey, if y is equal to 2x plus 3, then I'm going to plug 2x plus 3 in for y in the second equation. So instead of y equals 5x, I'm going to write 2x plus 3 equals 5x. They're all equal to each other. So I substituted it in. I showed you that in the orange. And now it says in step 3 to solve for that variable. This is a little simpler way to solve. So I just have to move my variables to the same side. So I'm going to move my 2x by subtracting it over to the right side of my equation, and I am left with 3 equals 3x. It's a one-step equation now. All I'm going to do is divide by 3, and I'm left with 1 equals x. So that is half of my answer. So we have gone and done steps 1, 2, and 3 pretty simply. The last thing that we're going to do before we write our answer is we're going to now substitute in this x for one of the equations from the start. It does not matter which one to do it, guys. I'm going to just plug it into this first equation. So I'm going to have y equals 2x plus 3. And now I'm going to rewrite it by substituting in my 1 that I found already. So instead of 2 times x, I'm going to write 2 times 1 plus 3. I'm going to solve for y. So 2 times 1 is 2 plus 3, which is 5. So I have y equals 5. So now that I have the math done, the last part is the easiest part. You just write your answer in a coordinate. Please remember that your coordinate is x comma y, so our answer is 1 comma 5. That is your final answer. If you were to graph these two equations in a coordinate grid, they will cross at 1 comma 5 at that coordinate. Go ahead and try the next two on your own. Don't be worried that you have a fraction of 1/2 in the first equation. If you're multiplying by 1/2, it's the same as dividing by 2. Also in the second equation, it looks like we have x by itself, so we're going to plug this section in for x right here because we've been plugging things in for y. Go ahead and try these equations, find your answer, make sure they're in a coordinate. Check back to see what my work looks like and to see if your answers are correct. All right, these are the answers that I have. I know it looks like a lot, so let me explain. So in the first example, I started in my orange and I showed you, hey, so I'm going to plug in this phrase in for y. So in orange, you could see that instead of that first equation having 2 times y, I have 2 times that phrase or that expression. In purple, I went ahead and solved. So I was getting x by himself, so I distributed out what I needed to do, and I got 1x minus 10. I combined my like terms to make 5x minus 10 equals 0. I added 10 because it was subtracting, so I added it to the other side to make 5x equals 10, and I ended with x equals 2. So that was that third step. The fourth step was, with the blue, I went ahead and started the x equals 2, and I showed you at the top that I was plugging into the first equation. You could have plugged it into the second equation, it doesn't matter. So in blue, you see that I wrote the first equation, but then I plugged in the 2 we got for x in. So 4 times 2 is 8. I went to the second side because I ran out of room. I subtracted 8 to the other side. I got -8 equals 2y. When I solved, I got y equals -4. That is not your final answer. Your final answer is the coordinate that I wrote it in. I wrote this x comma y to remind you. You put your x coordinate first, then your y, and that is your answer. This last one was a little more difficult because you had fractions. So you guys could have gotten a positive 0.5 and a negative 0.5. I'll write that for you guys also. So if you used decimals, that's okay too. Just make sure that they're correct. So in this example, I plugged in this expression in for x, and I showed you in orange again. In purple, I showed you how I solved it. I distributed first, then I combined my like terms of my y's. I moved 6 to the other side by subtracting. I had 14y equals -7, which came to our -1/2 or -0.5. Then I plugged this equation in for the very first equation in blue. So instead of 5 times y, I had 5 times 1/2 plus 3, and I got the answer of +1/2 or 0.5. So I plugged in my x and my y completely. I did x, comma, y as my answer.